One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. Two can be as bad as one. It's the loneliest number since the number one. Oh, it's so lonely this week on Sudbury Politics, the show. It's me and Richard.
That's right, Jeff. Rachel's not here this week, so I guess it's just you and I. But you know what happened the last time? They let us do it by ourselves.
I sure do.
Oh,
which is why I'm here.
Oh no!
It's Director Danielle.
Sorry, guys. Can't let you do this one by yourself. It's not happening.
Aw.
It's probably a good idea.
I know. That's why I'm here. Not happening.
Well, Rachel can't make it this week, so Danielle, how are you doing? We don't get to see you nigh on enough. Well, at least the audience doesn't. We get to watch your facial expressions while we do the show all the time.
Yeah, you certainly do. And now we're just going to sort of share them with everybody else out there for a change.
Not all of them, though, right?
Not all. No, there's some that are only specifically reserved, mostly for Jeff. There's a few for you in there, but I'm going to say the bulk of them generally go to Jeff. So
yeah, those are all the very kind looks.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Mm-hmm. Kind. Definitely.
Supportive looks.
Yes. Very communicative, we'll say.
So, lots happening in Ontario politics right now. We've seen the province announce that they're going to look at regional reopenings. It was a quick flip over the course of 24 hours from no, we'll never consider to do that to yes, that's the way we're going to do it. Thoughts?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. What we don't know the details yet. We know that they're committing to it. Danielle, what have you heard?
I mean, much. There's still a lot of question marks with everything, right? So we went from having nope, hard line, we're opening the province all at once to, well, the testing and the numbers are kind of lending us to believe that maybe we could do this way. So we're going to take a little bit more of a look at it. But again, there's so many question marks up in the air. Which places are going to be reopened? How are they going to be reopened? How are you going to control the flow of people in and out of the restricted zones? So there's still a lot that remains to be seen about how it's actually going to play out and how it's actually going to work and the success of doing it that way, I think.
I don't even think it's so much the devil's in the details as we don't really even know, if they're going to be able to pull this off at all. I mean, it's such a moving target for them to hit. We found out today that 700 some odd positive cases were not properly followed up on and cataloged in Toronto. And those people were presumably free to go and infect others in their contact lists. So might account for some of the boost in cases that we've seen. And we don't want those cases migrating here or other parts of the province where there aren't any cases. And then there's this whole pressure point that seems to really have exploded down south in the United States. But we're worried about, I think, legitimately happening here too, with this sort of the dramatic civil unrest. I mean, to the extent at which it seems more serious than we've seen in a very long time. South of the border, if it comes here too, what's the impact? Can they even get away with the regional reopening?
Yeah, the civil unrest in the U.S. is interesting because we've seen a little bit of it hit Canada in Montreal. Definitely, the spark that ignited it wasn't COVID related at all. It's a long simmering issue that the U.S. and Canada has as well, of managing policing and racial communities and just managing how you interact with racial communities in general. But I think it's hard to argue the fuel of it, of everything happening in COVID, the massive unemployment numbers, the massive disparity of low income groups, being disproportionately hurt by COVID, that's not creating a powder keg, and that we're seeing that erupt now because people are in such dire straits all around.
Have we seen polling to back that up? I mean, I honestly, like, I can appreciate what's happening in the United States because because the United States is in such a bad place right now in so many ways. And the concept that we can't tell who's inciting violence and to what extent that this is like completely legitimate rage by people that should be equal but are not. And then mixed into it is 23 million unemployed Americans right now. I don't hear that same anger in Canada, except when we start digging deeper into the problems that we also have with race. And there's a heck of a lot of very appropriate anger there too. But I don't see it triggering the same kind of we've been locked down by COVID reactions here, and I haven't seen it borne out in opinion polls either. Am I missing something?
I don't think in the U.S. that anybody was saying, "Oh, we got locked down by COVID, and now we're going to riot." Like, I don't think there was ever a conscious connection. I think it's that nothing happens in a vacuum. Horrible things have been happening in the U.S. for 400 years, and it's been 60 years since these kind of riots, maybe more. The closest that happened was the Rodney King riots in, I think, 97, but that didn't go national. There's the other layer of the emotional distress that people are under that I'm sure is not helping this situation in any way, and is probably going to feed it in some aspects, because you're definitely not social distancing in these protests.
Well, I think there was, it's hard because before what happened, George Floyd happened, there were riots going on, right? Like, you look at everything was simmering. It's like the lid was on the pot and it was rattling in the States. Like, that's what it looked like to me watching it happen. So you're seeing people who are locked down. There's people who are storming the state capitol in Michigan with guns and burning effigies of their governor. Like, there's been so many things going on that have led to this point. It's not an isolated incident that blew the lid off this. It's been a powder keg, and it's been simmering for a very long time. And I think you can't pinpoint any one factor that set the lid off of this. I think things are so much more compounded right now because of COVID, because there's been isolation, because people are at work, because their mental health is under duress. And then something like this happens, which is just so appallingly inhumane to people that everybody had rightly an intense reaction to it. And it just exploded. And that's what we're seeing happen right now. And it doesn't help the fact that we talk about the difference between Canada and the US and how we don't see those same things translating here. Our leader, for all of his faults, isn't standing there in front of the people inciting and fanning the flames of it. We have a leader in the States who has been fanning the flames of racism and hatred and otherness for years. Even before he was in office, he was doing this in the campaign. So when your leader is making these behaviors acceptable and your leader is fanning these flames, how could it not go up in a burst like that? That's the difference. Like, our leaders aren't doing this. Like, our leaders are trying to quell and pacify, and as other leaders did in the States before this one, but that's not what's happening here. He's literally standing there laughing. Like, we talked about it in the pre-show. He's like Nero watching Rome burn and laughing as it happens because it's good for him.
Yeah.
In some twisted political way, this is good for him.
Yeah, and I think that terrifies all of us, that we know that there's a political upside. If you can imagine a political upside to the country being literally on fire. And if we dig down beneath this, the pandemic is not gone. And this is sort of to tie these two pieces together. And I completely agree with you, Danielle. The U.S. one of the reasons it is in a bad place as it is its leadership is intentionally putting it there.
Mhm.
But there is still a simmering pandemic here, and even though it looks like a lot of the people in those protests were wearing masks, I don't really think that it's going to mitigate the risk to thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of new cases in the United States. Now our border's closed. It'll probably stay closed for a very long time. I hope it stays closed until January 20th. And yet we are not immune. We are neither immune to the protests, nor are we immune to the impacts of a massive outbreak to the south of us. So I don't know how we square all of what's happening in the United States with what should be happening here going forward, and we're trying to pick our way through. I know Jeff and I have gone round and round and round on the concept of regional reopening. And I don't know if we want to keep talking about Trump. We could talk about Trump for the whole 30-minute show, I'm sure. And I think that, speaking for myself, I want to go back to the United States in November if we're able to do what I can to get rid of that guy. But we have to worry about what happens in Ontario first. So, what's going to happen in Ontario right now? Are we going to regionally reopen, Jeff?
Well, it sounds like it. That's the intent out of the Premier's office at this point. To me, that makes sense. The goal of COVID mitigation was never to cure COVID through social distancing. It was always to slow the growth of this virus to the point that hospitals could manage it. And we're at a point, especially in Northern Ontario, but lots of places in Ontario, that we are managing it, that these things aren't issues, and that, it's time for some of these things to reopen or get back to normal. Things like elective surgeries or people being able to visit sick ones in the hospital or sick family members in the hospital. We saw a young man die recently in Sudbury alone because his family couldn't visit. Is that necessary when we don't have the cases here? I believe there's 4 open cases. They're all tracked. The last community spread was early March. So it's not like we have all of these cases popping up that we don't have control of. We're testing more in Sudbury than the rest of the provinces. We have the highest testing numbers. At what point do we remain locked down here when we don't have the issue? How much damage do we do to people's mental health? How much damage do we do to our economy? How much damage do we do to people's physical health that can't get elective surgeries? I know this year I had problems with a kidney stone. I had to wait an extremely long time to get it dealt with. If it happened during COVID, I would have had to wait even longer. The whole time I would have been on very addictive painkillers. What damage does that do to my health in the long run? What damage was that doing to other people in that situation in the long run? There's more going on than COVID, and we have to be smarter about this than just one lens.
No, I completely agree with everything you're saying. There's more factors. It's not just the health factor. There's the financial factor, there's the economic factor, there's the mental health factor. There's so many other things that are going into decisions that have to be made with respect to reopening. And I think there's also the worry too that what is it going to look like? And if you take a regional approach, how is that going to impact the region that is being reopened versus others that aren't? If you reopen one area, are people going to come to that area from a restricted area? Or can you stop people from doing that? Or family travel, right? Like, say I have family here and I'm in here. How do I get from point A to point B? There's so many factors and so many unknowns that go into it. And I agree, we do have to start reopening some things. It's pretty clear that people are getting antsy about it and they're getting to the end of their rope about it. I don't think we're going to see that sort of spark of outrage like we're seeing in the States. I just don't think we're quite there yet. But if you don't take the right approach to it and you do keep people under lock and key for too long, it could eventually happen. And I think if you do it, and like you could see it happen if you say they, let everywhere else go except for the GTA. How are the people in the GTA going to react to that, right?
Yeah, like I think one of the things on that is the difference between Canada and the US right now is there's massive distrust in government at all levels in the US right now. It's been stoked from both sides. It's horrible. You don't see that as much in Canada. There's definitely some of it. There's that undercurrent of, those awful liberals or those horrible Tories or whatever, but it's not the same.
No.
I think you will see that happen if the restrictions become felt to be extremely unreasonable. And if people are seeing restrictions that don't match the reality of what's happening in their community, I think you're going to start seeing people get massively upset and start losing trust in their government.
So my concern is actually the exact opposite of that. I think that, like, my big worry is that cases will spread. So it'd be two different people that'll be angry, right? There'll be the people that'll be angry that we're not able to do the things that we want to do, and we perceive this as being unfair, and maybe we'll have a protest on the corner in front of City Hall. But that wouldn't be the average person, although that might be a growing number of people that are doing that. But I think the larger group will be upset if we fumble the ball. We're at 0 cases right now. If suddenly we go back up to 100 active cases and the hospital's humming with the sound of ventilators, and we're having a hard time keeping everyone healthy, I think people will hold the government in extreme contempt if they allow that to happen. So, I mean, I appreciate this idea that if we have the opportunity to open up, we have to do that. And I think there's an equality question here too. Like, if you happen to be unlucky enough to live in one part of the province, you're gonna be out of luck, and the rest of us are gonna have to drive through one of 100 checkpoints to get from point A to point B. My family lives in the Kingston area, where also there are no cases that are active right now, and I'd love to nothing but to go and visit them with my kids. They haven't seen their grandkids in 6 months. They'd love to see them. Maybe it's not a huge disincentive to force my way through half a dozen checkpoints to get there. Maybe it doesn't matter so much. But there is a real question about whether it's possible within the boundaries of the emergency declaration to be able to restrict travel within the province. I don't know about that. I haven't really looked at it. But it's going to be very difficult, I think, to logistically stop travel within Ontario from one place to another. Maybe you can, Northern Ontario is kind of lucky. We have sort of 2 roads. You can cut off 11 and you can cut off 69. Maybe you restrict 17 at Mattawa. Sure, you can cut Northern Ontario off from the rest of the province. But if you're in Kingston and the hotspot is Toronto, well, there's 100 ways to get from Kingston to Toronto, and you can't possibly close them all. I don't think you can do it. So how do you restrict that? What are the logistics? Is it possible? Underlying all of that is reopening fair? We were talking about childcare. I'm going to talk about childcare in a minute, but I'll pass it back to you, Jeff.
Well, I think when you talk about that balance, right? What's the damage you're doing by keeping areas closed that don't have cases versus the cost of putting restrictions on to reduce travel between areas? I think that's pretty obvious at a certain point that, to set up 100 checkpoints versus shut down 1,000 businesses is pretty simple math. You start looking at the impact that you're going to have on people's lives and letting them have some normalcy back. And it's probably not going to, I don't think anybody's talking about like opening things wide up again, but at some sense of new normal, where you may, go into a restaurant and your waitress has a mask on and half the tables are closed, so that you can do things somewhat normal, but have some restrictions that allow for it baked in. I think that is a more sensible approach than just a hard no, don't do anything.
Well, there is a do no harm though, right? I mean, like you could make it worse. You actually could make it worse. We see whatever we're doing now seems to be working for a part of it. Well, as you say, just for COVID. It's not just working for, it's working for COVID. It may not be working for everything. Danielle?
That's what, I was just about to jump in on that. So like, yes, it's the do no harm approach, but it's do no harm to what? Do no harm to the spread of cases, do no harm to the economy, do no harm to people's mental health. Like those all have to be weighed in. You can't just pick one thing. They're all intrinsically tied together. So if we're looking at reopenings, we have to be looking at the bigger picture across the board. And it's all of those things have to come into play. So that's sort of. Yeah,
like one of the interesting things at the end of this is going to be, what does this do to seasonal flu cases, right? Mm-hmm. Did the COVID shutdown and flu deaths this year? Did we reduce the amount of flu deaths, right? And if it did, is the answer that you shut down to prevent the flu? Or do you continue going and saying, yes, we're going to lose this many people every year to the flu, even though we now know that there's a way to stop it? Right?
Or do you make flu vaccines mandatory, right? I mean, there are other
there's
tools
other
at our disposals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's other options. But at the end of the day, it's how far do you go to reduce people's freedoms to combat a disease, and finding that balance. And it's not going to be, okay, we did it, it's fixed. It's going to be, okay, we did it, we need to make adjustments. We did it, we need to make adjustments. We did it, we need to make adjustments.
Yeah, like there's going to be a constant recalibration with this. Like it's not going to be that we get an answer tomorrow and then it's fixed. Like there are going to have to be steps and measures taken. Like there's going to be a constant back checking and recalibration every time we go forward in this, or how we move forward in this, and how we handle things like this in the future. Like there's no one size fits all solution to get us through this.
Are people ready to go backwards? That'd be my other word.
I think it would be worse, right? Like we talked about it when they first started locking people down, right? And I remember in one of our first shows, when we were doing the COVID, we were talking about the encroachment on people's civil rights and locking them down and their movement and things like that. And we were talking about, well, what would have happened if the government would have just locked it down completely all at once? And instead they took the incremental approach. But so we're taking this slow incremental approach to opening. But what happens when you pull that back? It's like giving a kid like holding out a piece of candy to a kid and then pulling it back at the last second and saying, yeah, no, you don't get that. Or you've had this for so long, or, I've given you chocolate for a week straight, but yeah, you're not getting chocolate anymore. Like it's that kind of, I know it sounds a little bit like a juvenile example, but how do you pull people back, and will people be able to go back, and how will they handle it? And what is the detriment to sort of giving people those freedoms and then taking them away again?
I really think that you're going to have to go up, and you're going to have to go down, and you're going to have to adjust the restrictions from time to time and from different region to different region.
I'm not saying that you're not going to have to.
Yeah.
How are people going to respond to that is the bigger question. Like there's no doubt there's going to have to be adjustments, and we may have to pull back, and we may have to change the way we're doing things, but it's how are people going to handle that? And are they going to listen to it? Or are we going to find ourselves with more protests at the legislature in Toronto, like bigger protests? So we're going to find, you know what I mean? There's that aspect to it as well.
Mm-hmm. I think you're always going to have stupid. So,
I get that, and I think that there's going to be, it's going to be way more than just the very minority of rabble-rousers that are going to be upset if we've gotten used to a special kind of normal now, and we're anxious to go back to what we're used to and what we look forward to. And every little inch of gain that we make is like, oh, it's so nice. I can do this now. Oh, I can't wait to see I can't wait to, have social distancing on the patio with my buddies because I haven't seen them in so long, right? I think it's so much harder to go backwards. And so that's, my thing is that I'd rather err on the side of not reopening as much because I don't want to see us losing the whole thing at, as I say, at Christmas season. We lost the shittiest retail time of the year. We lost the butt end of the retail time. If we lose November and December to Amazon, every small retailer, even mid-sized retailer in this country is going to feel it to the point where they may not survive. And how long can we keep COVID bailout, wage subsidies, and all kinds of federal money flowing before federally we're out of money?
But we don't have control of that, whether we seal up COVID in Ontario or not. Right?
Maybe, but if we're at 0 cases in Sudbury right now, we can't possibly go down from there. So we're already as good as we can be. Yeah. Why do we want to make it worse?
Because it is worse, right? Once you get to 0 cases, if you don't start reopening, people are going to start losing their minds. You're going to have businesses going under saying, why am I going out of business when there's 0 cases? And you're going to have people revolt.
Again, that was my question. Is that enough of a reason? But if it is, let's say that it is, let's talk about.
I don't think it's just the business side of things, right? Like we talk about, like Richard, you and I have kids. So we talk about childcare, right?
Yeah, that's
like
a huge one.
That. So we're sitting here right now. There's an emergency order across the province that has childcare centers closed. And a lot of the day camps are closed. The city suspended all of their day camps. They're not offering summer programming and things like that. So we have 0 cases in the region. So there's going to be a lot of people asking, well, if there's nothing going on here, then why can't those places open? And if there's no cases here and I'm being expected to go back to work, what am I going to do with my kids if there's nowhere to send them?
And that's already happening.
Go back
that
is happening. So
it's happening now.
So that's something to consider, right? And there are a lot of people in our community who rely on those programs to be able to send their kids to, because we talked about the sort of private versus public type programming that there is. You send a kid to science camp or conservation camp or gymnastics camp. It's like $500 a week. It's crazy expensive. Yes, they have the time of their lives, but it's expensive. And that's not something that all people can afford. And then you have sort of city run camps where it's a lot more affordable to be able to send your child to. So how does that all work?
Well, it's all about scaling the reopening, right? Like those are all the levers you got to pull piece by piece by piece to get it back to normal. And then sometimes it went too far. Richard was saying, what happens when you go a little bit and then you get things pulled back from you. We've all dealt with that. It's called life. Like every single piece of your life, that's what it looks like. I go on a diet, I lose some weight, I fall back from the diet, I gain some weight. I get a job, I get a raise, my bills go up, I have less money, I get a better raise, things improve. I get a new car, the amount of money I have to spend drops down. The human condition is really well trained to all of that.
And we're much happier with it when it's our decision. This would be we would feel like this would be imposed upon us from afar by Buddy from Brampton who hops in the Civic and comes on up here to hand out the grand. That is not even a thing.
Please tell me no.
Right? But there are cases in Southern Ontario, lots and lots of cases. There are more every day. How stopping them from coming here and then it blows everything apart. I don't know how you stop it. I don't think you can stop it. So either you just accept that you can't stop it and carry on and just sort of like, that's it, we're going to reopen, which sounds a lot like a red state to me. Or you do it, you restrain and restrain.
Okay, but this is what sort of going back to Jeff's argument, argument, whatever, when we first started talking about this, it's not about getting to zero. It's about flattening and making sure that our systems in place can handle the number of cases. It's there, it's out there. Like, yes, we might not have cases in the region right now. It doesn't mean that we're going to get them. It's never been about getting everything down to zero. It's been getting the number of cases down to a manageable level so things can slowly start to filter back to opening.
Yeah, we could eliminate the flu if we told everybody to socially isolate for a couple of years, right? There wouldn't be transmission back and forth, and eventually you would not have a flu anymore. That's not the expectation that humans have of their society. It's that, okay, yeah, there's bad things out there that are going to kill me. You know, is the government going to start telling me this is how much you have to exercise every day and this is what you have to eat so you don't get heart disease? No, that's not reasonable. What the other side of it is that nobody wants to see is to have a disease overrun our system, that it can't handle every other problem in the healthcare system and everybody's dying from everything. That's what flattening the curve was always about. It was about allowing the system to be able to handle the amount of cases coming in.
But we want to avoid those spikes. So a spike,
when
you're complacent.
But nobody's saying flip the switch and walk away and never think about it again.
No, exactly. That's not what it is.
It's turn the dial. It's turn the dial and say, okay, now observe. And when things start changing, switch the dial a little bit back the other way, and then turn the dial a little bit back the other way. And part of that will be people will learn, hey, jerk, don't go out without your mask on because you're going to get people sick. And then I'm not going to be able to go out next week. So you're going to increase social pressures the same way that you do for drinking and driving, the same way that you do for a lot of society ills.
So do you think this is this our new normal now? Like, is this what it's going to be? Like those, so like you were talking about, like drinking and driving has been normalized. Those social pressures on people to sort of quote unquote behave themselves have been normalized. Is that what the future holds for the rest of us with this? Is that what it's going to look like?
I think temporarily. I think after a while it gets dealt with and people get lazy and people stop doing things and things get back to normal. I think there will be some new normal as far as health department regulations, like how a restaurant can operate or how something like a long-term care facility operates.
Definitely,
I think you're going to see
long-term care facilities.
big changes in how that works. And those will last a little bit longer. But I think the day-to-day things like people handshaking and all of that, there'll be some trepidation, and then social norms will change and they'll get back to normal. It may take a couple years, it may take a few years, but people will get over it. Or if you've been to any heavily Asian districts in North America, you'll notice masks are a normal wear. People from Asian countries dealt with SARS in a way that we didn't, and learned a lot and changed their behavior. But it's just part of what they do now. It's a fashion statement a lot of the time.
I hear everyone will be wearing them in the future.
Branded.
Branded, yes. Contact Marketing Hounds for your branded masks.
Branded. Not what I heard, but that's okay.
Well, there's only one way to sort this out, and that's to ask the listeners in a poll. So watch for our poll. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I'm willing to go on a limb and guess that regional reopening will be extremely popular. Happy to be the holdout on it, but we'll ask you. Hopefully, you'll chime in with your thoughts out there. Danielle, it's your first full episode. Without Rachel, we did one back, the four of us, I think, earlier at Christmas time. How did you like it?
I loved it. It was super fun. It was interesting being on this side with you guys. Although I felt like I had to be a little bit more aware of my facial expressions. That's okay.
Yeah, so I didn't know when I was talking too long. So I just kept going because I wasn't getting any cues.
I know. Usually I'm like furiously typing on the back and being like, okay, move on.
Yeah, I miss all of your facial expressions like, Jeff, that was a really good point. Or,
Yeah.
Jeff, you're a smart guy there.
You know what, Jeff? I'm not sure those are in the repertoire, to be honest.
I see them all the time.
Like,
How's the one
Trust me.
go where it's
There's-
Jeff, please put on those pants?
It's like
That
the,
would look like.
oh my God.
That's the one.
That's the usual. Then there's like the aggressive eye roll, like, oh my God. There's
That was a great one.
But-
though.
there's I don't know that Jeff, you're brilliant has quite made its way in there yet, but keep trying.
I see it.
There's
Well,
only one way from
I
the
see it
bottom,
hidden
Jeff.
behind the eye roll.
Well, keep your eyes on our Facebook page for your opportunity to buy a Sudbury Politics The Show branded face mask to wear around town. Everyone will know that you know what's going on because you're wearing a mask that says Sudbury Politics The Show on it. And thanks for listening. Thank you, Danielle, for subbing in this week. It was great having you. Thanks, Jeff. Always great to debate with you and to hear you sing songs about being lonely. And we will be back with more of all of that in a week. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night, guys.
Night.
Bye.